I just want to give you, I want to have a quick discussion. I don't know, a quick, just a little story, less than 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, so there was a king and a queen,
Mm-hmm.
and they lived in a castle.
Mm-hmm.
The queen was having an affair with a peasant in town, and the king found out about it. The king found out about it. Now, the king was getting ready to go off for war for a long time. But before he left, he told the queen, hey, I'm building a moat around this castle, and I'd never want you to leave this castle grounds. And if you do, I've hired a guard just beyond the castle grounds across the moat that I've hired to execute you on sight if he sees you across the moat.
Okay.
He's going to execute you on sight. The queen says, okay. The king leaves. Now, the queen, after waiting for a long time, gets ready to, she starts to miss her lover, the peasant in town, and she wants to go see him. And she thinks to herself, you know, I think if I cross this moat and I get to the other side, maybe the guard won't see me and I'll be able to survive and I'll be able to peasant forever. The queen is gone. So the queen one day, she makes herself down the castle, she makes herself outside, she crosses the moat, she gets to the other side. Now, when she gets to the other side, she looks both ways. There's no guard. She can see her lover off into the distance. She starts to run toward him. Out of nowhere, the guard pops up out of the bushes, and with the swing of his sword, he swipes, cutting her head off, killing her instantly. Now, the question I ask is, who is most responsible for her death?
I think I've heard this before.
Who is most responsible for her death?
And
Who
I
is
think
most
she,
responsible for her death?
loaded.
Isn't she most responsible for her death? Because
No, she's not most responsible for her death.
why not?
I think what the story is to make us look at the system and the fact that the conditions where she was in and the fact that the king had a condition on her where she wasn't able to leave and she was forced to be in this castle, and she was put in a position where she had to choose between her freedom and her, you know, choice of this person or condemnation or solitude in this castle. So it's kind of like us trying to look
It
at
doesn't
the
necessarily
system and
say
not
that
looking at
she's in solitude or anything else. I think that you're adding to the story.
Yeah, you
It
answer the
just says
story.
that she cannot get to her lover, but that doesn't mean that she's isolated or alone.
But the fact that she can't leave the castle or else she dies, what is that? That's not.
I didn't say that it's right. We just asked who's most responsible for her death.
But
Who's most responsible for her death?
And I think that given the circumstances, it's her, not because, because the king gave a conditional order. The guard is following the order from the king, and she, knowing the risks, still went. She thought it was worth it.
Okay. And what do you think, Jasmine? Who's most responsible for her
I
death?
gave you my answer.
I didn't hear what you said.
My answer is there's no more responsible or less responsible.
I think there is a more. I mean, somewhere she's dead.
Yeah,
So
she's dead, but
who's most responsible for it? I didn't say that, because obviously in a situation like this, responsibility is always shared. So there is responsibility across the board, right? But who's most responsible? Because she is dead.
yeah, she's dead, but the queen is not the king's property.
Okay.
So the fact that she
In a
was
kingdom, she really is.
Let's
If you're talking about
let's take the rules.
monarchy.
Let's take the rules out of it. Let's just talk about the kingdom and monarchy and like consequences and right and wrong. Let's just talk about just the death and responsibility for it. Let's look straight at the characters involved and responsibility for her death.
okay. So the person
I think the person that cut off her head Exactly. The person that cut off her head is most responsible for her death. He's the one who killed her. How could the person who killed her be less responsible for her death if she's dead? Like,
But you know what? That is a
on her, on
question
her,
that we have today. You know how if you hire a hitman,
yeah,
who hired them gets life, and the person
yes.
who killed her get like 20 years or something like that.
No,
That
the person who, no. The person who killed her gets life. The person who hired her gets 20 years. Because what they're going to convict, who they're going to, and now, but before we go into that though, I want to look at the difference between responsibility and I want to look at the difference between fault, because I didn't say whose fault was it. I said who's most responsible for it. If you look at the woman's cause of death on her certificate, it's not going to say the queen. The queen is not the person who's most responsible for her death.
Okay. Okay.
So if you look at her death certificate, it's going to say she was killed by beheading. She was killed by beheading,
Right.
and the person who killed her was the guard. The king, before he left, gave the responsibility of killing the queen if she crossed the moat to the guard. He said, hey, if you see this, the guard, they have no idea of the context. He may have no idea that the queen was in solitary. He may have no idea that she had cheated on the king with the peasant. He has no idea of the context of the story. The only thing he knew that if he saw her across that moat, his job was to kill her. And I think a lot of times what happens in the church and in general is that it takes us away from the actual story. It takes us away from the actual context and looks at it teaches us to not place responsibility where it belongs, with the individual who actually committed the act. If I look at it, the queen was actually least responsible because the queen was most responsible for her life. She took her life into her own hands when she said, I'm going to cross this moat. I think I may be able to make it. She took her life into her own hands. She took the consequences, whatever came with it. She was only responsible for her life, but not for her death.
Hey, this is Jasmine. Hopefully, you are enjoying the conversation. You're getting a lot out of it. Head over to patreon.com to see the full video. There will be 2 extra guests on the panel to discuss further the role of the church in the Trump era and make a pledge so you can get full access. See you over there. Bye.